Salutations and welcome, friends, to another Trust the Profits Preakness Spotlight series. My name is Matthew DeSantis. You can find me on Twitter at the handle at Failed to Menace. Well, before we get into this spotlight series for the 148th running of the Preakness Stakes on the horse Blazing Sevens, make sure to press that subscribe button here on YouTube to get all of our content on Trust the Profits. Folks, we have a lot more than just Triple Crown races. We got all of the graded stakes previews that you're going to want. We have tons of handicapping videos. We bring on guests from across the industry, international races, domestic races. We got you covered. Live betting Thursday nights. We have a slew of different types of content. So no matter what aspect of horse racing you're into, we got you covered. Additionally, make sure to like this video and comment below with what you think Blazing Sevens chances are at winning this year's Preakness Stakes. Well, let's dive into this runner for Chad Brown, Blazing Sevens, who of course qualified for the Kentucky Derby, but was pulled out of the race by Chad Brown, much as he did last year with the horse early voting. Now, I've seen some people go, Matthew, you can't equate early voting to Blazing Sevens. I'm not trying to do that. I'm not trying to equate early voting and Blazing Sevens. What I'm equating is Chad Brown pulling out one of his horses from the Kentucky Derby and pointing that horse instead towards the Preakness Stakes. It obviously paid off last year with early voting, who was, I think, a much better horse than Blazing Sevens, but still it worked with early voting to let the rest of the crop run in that, the Kentucky Derby. And then just a few of them come along to the Preakness at Pimlico. And now here's Blazing Sevens sitting fresh, as last year early voting was sitting fresh, waiting for everybody to come to that particular race. So let's talk a little bit more about Blazing Sevens and dive into this particular race. And he's an intriguing horse because, listen, he's got some back class for sure. And when you look at this particular field, he does stand out a little bit in terms of name recognition. I mean, a horse like Chase the Chaos is going to be a pretty big long shot. A horse like Perform is going to be a pretty big long shot. There's some rumors a horse like Henry Q might end up running in this race. Another, a nice horse, but might be a little bit more of a long shot. You look at horses like Mage and Confidence Game and Disarm. They're all going to be coming back from just running in the Kentucky Derby. Horse like Red Route 1 is a deep closer who doesn't get there very often, did last time out, but still is a little bit of a dicey proposition. So a horse like Blazing Sevens on a certain level makes a little bit of sense, but he's also a horse that likes to come from the back. And there's not a lot of front end speed in this particular race. Now, if Henry Q draws into the field, as some people are speculating, then maybe there's a little bit more front end speed or a contesting of front end speed with Confidence Game and First Mission. But like I said, Blazing Sevens might not have the same type of trip that early voting had last year, where early voting got out and sat in that kind of perfect stalking position in second place and then was able to launch for home and hold off Epicenter late to win the Preakness Stakes. So listen, Chad Brown, does he have another potential winner on his hands this year? Well, from a pedigree standpoint, there's a lot to like here. Obviously, also, this is a horse that is traditionally jockeyed by Irad Ortiz Jr. So listen, Irad, when he's on a roll, he's on a roll. He just went from presumably running the favorite in the Kentucky Derby on Forte, who got scratched, to finishing last place on Cyclone Mischief. Irad, I am sure, is going to want to come back and get a little bit of revenge here in the Preakness Stakes and have a much better effort. From a pedigree standpoint, listen, Blazing Sevens is one of three good magic colts running in this field. That is, I think, particularly noteworthy. You have Mage, you have Blazing Sevens, and you have Perform. All three of them are good magic colts. That good magic siring line already paying huge dividends for those people who believed in it, because they are turning out some really impressive classic distance horses already. Good Magic appears to be just like his father, Curlin, can run for days in terms of those offspring and those progeny. So a lot to like there. You have Trophy Girl as the dam out of or from Warriors Reward, I should say, and Medaglia d'Oro. So again, some classic connections there going back 1-2 generations underneath as well. So there's a lot to like from a pedigree standpoint for a horse like Blazing Sevens in this year's Preakness Stakes. What's not to like there? But let's take a little bit of a look at Blazing Sevens' past performances. This is a really interesting horse. Broke its maiden at Saratoga in his debut effort. Always a very flashy thing to do, right? I mean, you break your maiden at Saratoga, that's a big thing. I mean, there's a couple of tracks. You break your maiden at Keeneland, you break your maiden at Churchill, you break your maiden at Saratoga. People pay attention. So that was a horse with immediate expectations for a big-time trainer. Then goes to the Hopeful Stakes and runs third that day. Nice effort, but certainly took a little bit of a step back from an Equibase speed figure standpoint. then goes to Belmont at the Big A at Aqueduct and runs in the Grade 1 Champagne and wins that race coming for home and coming from the back of the pack, charging late. Super impressive effort that day in the slop. Put an asterisk in that. Remember that. In the slop in the Champagne that day. So showed the ability to win a Grade 1, very precocious 2-year-old in that regard. Then goes to the Breeders' Cup Juvenile, runs a halfway decent fourth. Listen, he was well beaten by horses like Forte and Cave Rock and National Treasure, but he still finished fourth that day in a large field. And so there was a lot to like there with Blazing Sevens. But then he goes on a really long layoff, goes on a 4-month layoff, and goes to Gulfstream Park next for the Fountain of Youth, where he finishes a very uninspiring 8th place effort. Now, here's the thing. If you were watching the coverage that day and you were paying attention to the interviews, they talked to Chad Brown before that race. When you listen to Chad Brown talk about Blazing Sevens before the Fountain of Youth, you I don't know if another dollar should have been wagered on that horse on that day, because it was very obvious from Chad's perspective that that horse was just there to stretch his legs, and it was not cranked up. It was not ready to go. This was purely a, hey, let's just get this horse some exercise. Let's get this horse some fitness for the next time out. And so didn't turn in a very good performance at the Fountain of Youth, but I didn't expect the horse to turn in a huge performance at the Fountain of Youth that day. Comes back in the Bluegrass and actually runs, I think, a better race than I was certainly anticipating. I thought he was going to run a nothing race that day. He ended up running third, but was well beaten by both Verifying and Tapit Trice, both of whom we saw be kind of also rans in the Kentucky Derby. But I think that's just, I wasn't particularly high on either of those horses going into the Kentucky Derby. But I think they're both very nice horses. They're good horses that are capable of winning, obviously, Grade 1, Grade 2 level races. So listen, finished third, but was well beaten, 6.5 lengths back. Now, was able to then put away the rest of that field and finishing third. That was a decent sized field. So finishing third that day, not bad. You saw a huge bounce up to N Equibase speed figures from a 65 in the Fountain of Youth to a 94 in the Bluegrass. Now this horse skips the Kentucky Derby and goes to the Preakness. Is going to be coming off about a 6-week layoff, which is pretty perfect, actually, of all things considered. And you wonder, is this horse capable of another step forward? Listen, if this horse progresses again, he's absolutely got a shot in this particular race. This is not an overwhelming field. I think Mage is certainly a very good horse. I like National Treasure. I like Confidence Game. I like these horses, but he's not running up against any monsters necessarily in this particular field outside potentially of Mage. So it's going to be interesting to see how this all plays out for Blazing Sevens. But like I said, there's some reason to suspect third back in the form cycle is going to be maybe giving his best performance here at Pimlico for the Preakness, for a trainer who pulled this exact same move last year. Very different type of horse, admittedly, very different type of running style, and comes into the race in a different type of a form as well. If you remember, early voting was very good in those New York prep races going into the Kentucky Derby. And so him leaving that Kentucky Derby was a little bit of a big deal in terms of, you know, he was going to be one of the top, 3-4 choices probably last year in the Kentucky Derby. Blazing Sevens was not going to be that this year in the Kentucky Derby, but still decided to forego that race to go to the Preakness instead. Listen, ultimately, where do I land on Blazing Sevens? I'll probably use this horse underneath, maybe in a kind of a try that I, kind of spread a little bit in the third leg of the trifecta. I don't necessarily view him as a huge win threat here. His running style, I don't think sets up very well for the Preakness and the way that Pimlico is going to have that track playing on Saturday. I think that's a track that's going to see a huge early speed advantage. You want to be up near the front, I would imagine, going the mile and 3/16, those tighter turns everybody always talks about, the banked turns a little bit, typically do favor those horses that are on the front end. And so Blazing Seven is not going to be that. And he's also not proven outside of that effort on the slop that he's really a championship type of horse. So that's where I'm concerned that really his best effort came on the slop. And now I want to see what he does on a dry, fast track, which is what the forecast looks like it's going to be Saturday up in Baltimore. So like him a little bit underneath. Don't view him as a wing contender. He'll probably take a lot of money because of Chad Brown and Irad Ortiz, though. So if you want to play against, that's a beneficial thing because other horses are going to float up in price as a result of that. Well, listen, folks, thanks so much for tuning in to this episode of the Trust the Profits Preakness Spotlight series. Make sure to press that subscribe button. Make sure to like this video, comment below with your thoughts on Blazing Sevens. Throw me a follow on Twitter at the handle at Failed to Menace. Until next time, friends, my name is Matthew DeSantis, wishing you a great and profitable day at the races and reminding you that it's now post time.